For 2,000 years, nobody in the ancient Mediterranean world had any real idea where cinnamon actually came from. And that was not an accident. It was a lie, deliberately constructed and maintained for centuries by the merchants who controlled the trade, because cinnamon was one of the most valuable substances on Earth, and controlling the myth of its origin meant controlling the price. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, recorded one of the strangest cover stories in trade history. According to the tale circulating among Arabian spice merchants, cinnamon sticks were gathered from enormous nests built by giant birds high on inaccessible cliffs. Traders supposedly could not climb up to reach the nest directly, so instead they left out large chunks of meat below. The birds would carry the meat back up to their nests, and the combined weight would cause the nests, along with the cinnamon sticks woven into them, to collapse to the ground where merchants could finally collect it. Herodotus also relayed other fantastical variants, including one where cinnamon grew in deep marshes, guarded by winged serpents. These stories were not simple superstition. They were carefully maintained trade secrets, designed specifically to discourage anyone from attempting to locate and cut out the middlemen who controlled the actual supply chain. The truth was far more mundane and far more valuable to protect. Real cinnamon came from the inner bark of a tree native, specifically to the island of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, along with a related but lower quality variant called cassia that grew across parts of South and Southeast Asia. Arab traders had known this for centuries. But they had built an enormously profitable business, acting as the sole intermediaries between Ceylon and the Mediterranean world. And that business depended entirely on nobody else discovering the actual source. The ancient Egyptians prized cinnamon intensely, using it in medicine, in perfumes, and critically in the embalming process, where it was packed into the bodies of the dead as part of mummification alongside other aromatic resins. Egyptian demand alone was enough to make cinnamon one of the most valuable commodities moving through the ancient world. And Egyptian buyers had absolutely no idea it originated on an island, thousands of miles away, across open ocean. Roman writers inherited the same confused mythology. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, expressed open skepticism about the bird nest stories, even while repeating them, and separately noted that cinnamon's price bore no logical relationship to any known cost of production, strongly suggesting that Roman buyers were being charged an enormous markup, precisely because they had no way to verify what a fair price should be. That markup was staggering. Roman sources describe cinnamon as being worth many times its weight in silver.
Keep those fires
a luxury
burning!
So extreme that Emperor Nero reportedly burned a year's entire supply of cinnamon on the funeral pyre of his wife Poppaea as an extravagant display of imperial grief and wealth, a single gesture worth more than most Roman citizens would earn across their entire lives. The secrecy held for roughly 2,000 years, through the fall of Rome, through the medieval spice trade controlled by Arab and later Venetian merchants, who inherited and maintained the same protective silence around cinnamon's true origin, because Venice's entire economic dominance over European spice trade depended on that exact same information asymmetry. The secret finally broke when Portuguese explorers, pushing further into the Indian Ocean during the Age of Exploration, reached Ceylon directly in 1505 and discovered firsthand where cinnamon actually grew. Portugal moved quickly to establish direct control over cinnamon-producing regions of the island, cutting out the centuries-old chain of Arab and Venetian intermediaries entirely and seizing the profits for themselves. Portuguese control did not last. In 1638, the Dutch East India Company, known by its Dutch initials as the VOC, allied with the local kingdom of Kandy against Portuguese colonial forces on Ceylon. And by 1658, the Dutch had successfully expelled the Portuguese entirely and seized control of the island's cinnamon-producing coastal regions. What followed was one of the most ruthless commodity monopolies in colonial history. The VOC did not simply trade in cinnamon. It sought total exclusive control over the entire supply, enforcing that control through violence. The Dutch imposed forced labor obligations on the local Sinhalese population, specifically tied to cinnamon peeling, a skilled and physically demanding task requiring workers to strip thin layers of inner bark from cinnamon trees without damaging the tree itself. Entire communities were compelled into this labor under colonial mandate, with brutal punishments for those who failed to meet extraction quotas. To protect the value of their monopoly,
The stars
the
are bright
VOC went
tonight.
further still, deliberately destroying cinnamon trees, growing outside the specific regions they directly controlled, and in some documented cases, moving to suppress or violently put down local resistance to their extraction demands. Incidents that historians have characterized as colonial violence, bordering on massacre, in the effort to maintain total market control. The goal was simple and brutal: artificially restrict global supply to keep prices and Dutch profits as high as possible, regardless of the human cost required to enforce that scarcity. For roughly a century and a half, the VOC ran this monopoly with extraordinary profitability, until the British eventually seized control of Ceylon from the Dutch in 1796, inheriting the same cinnamon-growing regions, and, initially, many of the same coercive extraction structures the Dutch had built. Under British rule, cinnamon cultivation gradually expanded beyond the original, tightly restricted zones, and cultivation techniques spread to other tropical regions, including the Seychelles and parts of the Caribbean, slowly eroding the extreme scarcity that had defined cinnamon's value for millennia. By the 19th century, expanded cultivation, combined with the rise of cheaper cassia imports from China and Indonesia, had permanently broken cinnamon's ancient monopoly structure. Prices collapsed relative to their historical highs, and a spice that Roman emperors had once burned by the ton in displays of wealth became, within a few generations, an affordable pantry staple found in nearly every household kitchen across the world. Today, Sri Lanka remains the dominant producer of what is specifically labeled true or Ceylon cinnamon, while the vast majority of cinnamon sold globally, including most of what fills grocery store shelves in North America and Europe, is actually the related, but chemically distinct, cassia variety, cheaper to produce and containing higher levels of a compound called coumarin that has raised some health regulatory concerns in large quantities. Most consumers buying a jar labeled simply cinnamon have no idea they are almost certainly purchasing cassia rather than true cinnamon, an echo, however faint, of the same confusion about origin and authenticity that define this spice for its first 2,000 years of recorded history. What began as a deliberately fabricated myth about giant birds guarding cliffside nests ended in colonial massacre, forced labor, and a monopoly so valuable that a European trading company was willing to destroy trees and suppress entire communities to protect it. The next time cinnamon is stirred into your coffee or dusted over a pastry, it carries with it one of history's longest-running lies and one of its most violently protected trade secrets. If this story surprised you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Drop a comment and tell us what everyday ingredient you want us to dig into next.